Welcome to Jobbed Out, the wrestling editorial that reminds you that WCW Backstage Assault could have been a much better game if they put more women in it. Also, WCW Backstage Assault would have been a better game if they never made WCW Backstage Assault. Years ago on my old channel, when the WWE's women's division, the Divas division was in shambles, and both fans and performers alike were equally frustrated, I had begun a series called Why Divas Deserve Better. It was to tackle the different eras of women's wrestling. You've hopefully seen the tragic career of Mildred Burke, where women went from not being considered in the industry to becoming a sideshow act. And of course my warm and fuzzy opinions on the fabulous Moolah, where the industry was to take exactly one woman seriously. Just the one. Well, when Moolah faded and refused to let anybody else pick up the ball, women's wrestling disappeared almost immediately. Yeah, there were the likes of Misty Blue and Linda Dallas, but the stock of women's wrestling absolutely plummeted, and eventually, they weren't even deemed to be worth booking. That set the stage for a new type of female performer in wrestling, the Valet. Sure, there'd been managers before, but they were usually heels. They interfered in matches, they fought, they took bumps. This is the story of someone who was absolutely everything that these managers at the time were not. In 1985, the WWE scored the biggest get they would probably ever find out of an outlaw federation. They landed Macho Man Randy Savage. He was a phenomenal performer, a high flyer by that era's standards. But even though he could speak, they wanted to give him a manager. On TV, he was courted by all the WWF's big heel stables before introducing the future of women in wrestling, Miss Elizabeth. She was beautiful, stunning, but most importantly, she was everything that Randy Savage was not. She was quiet, she was honorable, she had manners, and she was vital in making Macho a babyface without him ever actually having to change his character. He could still be a loud, brash, paranoid schizophrenic with trust issues with an explosive personality, and the heels would focus on Liz, leading fans to have sympathy for her instead of having sympathy for him. Flair, Jake, Honky Tonk, their plans were all to hurt the sweet innocent Valet, so that Savage could be unhinged and in his lapse of focus cost himself matches. Even babyface George the Animal Steel was more obsessed with Elizabeth, smitten by the pure beauty that heel Macho Man could capitalize on. While it was absolutely brilliant, it totally set a bad precedent. Unlike other women who had become managers, the Luna Vachons, the Sensational Sherrys, Miss Elizabeth had ceased to be a partner in crime and became a prop. Now I'm gonna get heat for this comment, but tell me the difference between Miss Elizabeth at Macho's side and, let's say, the $1 Million Championship. And the fact that it was a woman who never actually wrestled, at least not until WCW, women just became the damsel in distress. Hell, Jake the Snake's wife fell into that role. And because women had become the props, they no longer needed a prop. WWF abandoned its women's title twice. WCW barely even had one. Actually, two. They barely had two. But Miss Elizabeth felt different than these other damsels because she herself was special. She was the first lady of wrestling. And she was everything pro wrestling wasn't. Like I said earlier, she was graceful, she was kind, she was caring. She was a character that didn't belong in wrestling and must have just gotten mixed up with the bad guys, mixed up with Randy. As a heel, fans loved her and hated Savage because they felt that she could do better. As a face, she was a sweetheart and she was to be protected from all the monsters that were around her. One of the greatest stories to come from Savage and Elizabeth would be him leaving her, as in real life, Liz needed to get away from the road. She was burnt out, basically just living in the hotel room and the dressing room. Her real life husband so overprotective to the point that he didn't allow her to interact with anybody unless he was present. On TV, Savage became the Macho King with Queen Sherry Martel, and one of the greatest payoffs in pro wrestling history would be when Sherry turned on Macho, her meal ticket, after he lost a retirement match. Only for Miss Elizabeth to jump a guardrail and defend the man she had always loved, that she still loved, showing him the light, and changing how he was to treat the love of his life. On TV, anyway. Sadly, the real-life paranoia and possessiveness of Randy Savage led to Liz not so much divorcing him as much as straight-up fleeing. If you haven't seen the Dark Side of the Ring special on that, do it now. I'm gonna post the Daily Motion link in the description just in case you're not in the US, as it's blocked on YouTube for international audiences. Macho would end up leaving for WCW, and he'd bring Liz with her just to ensure that his ex-wife was still financially stable. On TV, she once again became a prop, this time with Macho as the good guy and with Liz as the evil one. That's the story of her whole career, really, all the way to the end, where she was literally being held hostage by Vince Russo, who owned her contract. Once again, Miss Elizabeth was the damsel in distress. Always a damsel in distress. And I'm afraid Elizabeth's real life would only get worse. Being so unaccustomed to freedom, she overindulged. Like a teenager who finally got the car's keys or a case of beer. She started seeing Lex Luger in WCW, with full knowledge that Luger was married at the time, even at one point going so far as to live in the same building as the married couple while having this affair. She drank and did drugs and partied, all the things that she was never allowed to do in the 80s when she was with Savage. And because she was never allowed to do that stuff, she overdid that stuff. Ultimately, having overconsumed on alcohol and painkillers, Elizabeth Hewlett passed away on May 1st, 2003. To the date of this recording 17 years later, the WWE still has not put her in the Hall of Fame. I'm assuming because they can't figure out who would accept the award. She had no kids, no siblings to my knowledge. At most, we can hope she gets inducted through the Legacy Wing, which I've got my own opinions of, but that's for another time. So that's the quick story of Miss Elizabeth and the rise of the non-wrestler in women's wrestling. God, these things are so depressing. And while my original series ended here, I think I want to keep this going. I think it's about time we finally get to that next chapter, the pro wrestling pinup. For now though, I want to ask you, what were your favorite moments of Miss Elizabeth in pro wrestling? And knowing what you know now, has your opinion of her changed at all? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe because I want you to be a part of the conversation too. For now though, I better get my shoulders off the mat, so thank you for tuning in to Jobbed Out. I'll catch you next time.